My name is Victoria Clark, and I live in a beautiful Victorian house in Pacific Heights, San Francisco. For 25 years, I've run one of the most respected art authentication galleries on the West Coast. I'm 52 years old, married to David Chen, and mother to twin daughters, who are now in their senior year at Berkeley. The painting is a fake, I whispered into the phone, standing alone in my gallery at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. The caller hung up immediately. Strange. In all my years of running Chen Gallery, I'd never had someone react that way to authentication results. Usually, people argued, pleaded, or demanded second opinions. They didn't just disappear into silence. My reflection stared back from the gallery's floor-to-ceiling windows, overlaid against the foggy San Francisco evening. Victoria Clark, art authenticator, gallery owner, wife, mother. At 52, I still commanded respect in rooms full of collectors and critics. My black hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled into the same elegant chignon I'd worn since graduate school. The charcoal Armani suit fit perfectly, a reminder that some things remained constant, even when everything else seemed to be shifting beneath my feet. The Monet water lily painting sat on the easel behind me, bathed in gallery lighting. To most eyes, it looked pristine, museum quality. But I'd spent 3 days examining every brushstroke under magnification. The pigments were wrong for the period. The canvas weave didn't match Monet's preferred suppliers. Most damning of all, the signature showed hesitation marks that the master never made. Someone had invested considerable money and effort to create a very convincing lie. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my career on distinguishing truth from deception, yet I'd been blind to the forgery happening in my own home. My phone buzzed. A text from David, my husband, working late again. Don't wait up. Love you. The same message I'd received every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months. Always punctuated with those 2 words that had once meant everything, and now felt like an afterthought. I touched the screen to call him back, then stopped. Through the gallery window, I could see the restaurant across the street, Chez Laurent, where David had taken me for our anniversary 3 months ago, where he'd seemed distracted, checking his phone between courses, apologizing with that charming smile that had won me over 25 years ago, when he was a struggling MBA student and I was finishing my PhD in art history. The same restaurant where I'd seen him last Tuesday, tucked into a corner booth with someone who definitely wasn't a client. Someone with platinum blonde hair and a laugh that carried across the street, even through closed windows. Someone who leaned across the table to touch his hand in a way that spoke of familiarity, intimacy, ownership. I'd stood frozen on this exact spot, watching my husband of 25 years feed another woman bites of the chocolate souffle he'd once claimed was our dessert. The dessert we'd shared on our first date, our wedding night, every anniversary since. Now it belonged to them. But I hadn't confronted him. I'd watched, memorized details, and retreated into the gallery, like a detective gathering evidence. Because that's what I do. I authenticate. I verify. I make sure I have all the facts before I render judgment. The gallery door chimed, startling me from my thoughts. I expected to see my assistant Emma, returning for her forgotten keys. But instead, a woman stepped into the space. Tall, blonde, wearing a red coat that looked expensive, even from across the room. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed, admired, desired. My stomach dropped. I recognized her from Tuesday night. Mrs. Chen? Her voice was honey smooth with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. I'm Sophia Martinelli. I believe you've been examining a painting that belongs to my gallery? The Monet. She was here about the fake Monet. I'm afraid I can't discuss authentication results with anyone other than the owner who submitted the piece, I replied, falling back on professional protocol even as my heart hammered against my ribs. She smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Oh, but I think you can. You see, the owner is my business partner, David Chen. I believe you know him quite well. The words hit like a physical blow. Business partner. The woman my husband was having an affair with was also his business partner. The woman who'd submitted a forged Monet to my gallery, knowing I'd be the one to authenticate it. The woman who'd sat across from my husband at our anniversary restaurant. feeding him our dessert, was standing in my gallery at 9 o'clock at night, discussing business as if it were the most natural thing in the world. David has told me so much about your expertise. Sophia continued, circling the gallery like a predator surveying territory. He says you have an eye for spotting fakes that's almost supernatural. That you can see through any deception. Almost supernatural. Except when it came to my own marriage, apparently. The painting is a fake, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A very good one, but a fake nonetheless. The authentication report will be ready tomorrow. That's unfortunate, Sophia said, not looking unfortunate at all. David was hoping you might reconsider. Perhaps take another look. Sometimes even experts can make mistakes. She was asking me to lie. To compromise my reputation, my integrity. My life's work for the sake of a forgery. For David. For their business partnership. For whatever this thing was between them. I don't make mistakes about authentication, I said. Not ever. Sophia's smile widened. No, I suppose you don't. David mentioned that about you. He said you see everything, remember everything, document everything. It's one of your most admirable qualities. And most inconvenient. There was a threat buried in those words, delicate as tissue paper. But sharp as glass. She was telling me she knew that I knew. About the restaurant. About the affair. About all of it. The report will be ready tomorrow, I repeated. Of course it will. Sophia moved toward the door, then paused. You know, David and I were just discussing how difficult it must be for you. Working alone so many evenings. All those long hours, all that solitude. It would be easy for someone to feel forgotten, wouldn't it? Replaced, even. And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume. And the echo of her heels on marble. I stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of authentic art. And realized I'd been living with a forgery for months. My marriage, my trust, my understanding of my own life. All of it as fake as the Monet on the easel. But unlike the painting, I couldn't simply write a report. And expose the deception. This forgery was woven into the fabric of my daily existence. Signed with 25 years of shared memories, authenticated by 2 daughters who adored their father. Valued by a community that saw us as the perfect couple. I walked to my desk and pulled out a bottle of wine I kept for gallery openings. Poured a glass of Cabernet and stood before the Monet. Studying the careful deception. Someone had invested considerable time, money, and skill to create this lie. They'd researched Monet's techniques, acquired period-appropriate materials, studied his signature until they could reproduce it flawlessly. They'd created something beautiful, valuable, convincing. But it was still a lie. And I was still the woman who could see through any deception. Almost. The coffee was cold. I'd been sitting in my home office since 5 a.m., surrounded by files that had nothing to do with art. Authentication and everything to do with marriage dissection. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, travel receipts. 25 years of shared finances spread across my antique desk. Like evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. But I'm thorough. It's what I do. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Business trips to Los Angeles that lasted exactly 3 days. Always the same hotel, always charged to David's corporate card. Always with a client dinner that cost enough for 2 people. The trips had started 8 months ago. Right around the time David had begun working with his new business partner on the import venture. Sophia Martinelli. Even her name sounded like something from a romance novel. I'd looked her up online after she left the gallery. 34 years old, born in Milan, moved to San Francisco 5 years ago. She specialized in European art imports, with a particular focus on post-impressionist works. Her gallery, Martinelli Fine Arts, occupied a prime location in Union Square. Her website featured photos of her at gallery openings, always perfectly dressed, always smiling. Always surrounded by admiring men in expensive suits. My phone buzzed. A text from David, flying to LA this morning. Back Wednesday. Miss you already. Wednesday. Today was Monday. Another 3-day trip, another client meeting that would undoubtedly involve the same hotel. The same restaurants, the same lies. I scrolled through my contacts and found Emma's number. My gallery assistant was young, ambitious, and had a talent for social media investigation that I'd never quite mastered. Emma, I need a favor. It's personal. 30 minutes later, she was sitting across from my desk. Her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. With the intensity of a pianist performing Carnegie Hall. Sophia Martinelli, she said, reading from the screen. Very active on Instagram. She posts a lot of travel photos, restaurant shots, gallery events. And Emma paused, her expression shifting from professional to sympathetic. Mrs. Chen, are you sure you want to see this? I nodded, though my stomach was already churning. Emma turned the laptop toward me. The screen showed Sophia's Instagram story from last week. A photo of 2 wine glasses at what was clearly an intimate dinner. The caption read, "Perfect evening with my perfect partner." You could see a man's hands across the table. A wedding ring glinting in the candlelight. David's wedding ring, the one I'd slipped onto his finger 25 years ago, promising to love, honor, and cherish until death do us part. Apparently, death wasn't the only thing that could end a marriage. There's more, Emma said gently. She scrolled through several posts. Sophia at art galleries, Sophia on beaches, Sophia in hotel lobbies. Always alone in the photos, but the captions told a different story. Exploring new acquisitions with my business partner. Celebrating successful negotiations. Sometimes the best deals happen over dinner. Business partner. The euphemism was almost insulting in its transparency. Mrs. Chen? Emma's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? I realized I'd been holding my breath. The authentication report for the Monet. I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. I need you to delay sending it for a few days. Is there a problem with the analysis? No, the painting is definitely a fake. I just need more time to verify some additional details. Emma nodded, but I could see questions in her eyes. After 3 years of working together, she knew I didn't second-guess my authentications. Ever. After she left, I called in sick to the gallery. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide what kind of woman I was going to be. In the face of this betrayal, the kind who screamed and threw dishes, the kind who hired a private investigator and took him for everything he was worth, the kind who pretended not to know and slowly died inside, maintaining the facade of a perfect marriage until it killed her, or the kind who treated this like any other authentication. Gather evidence, analyze the facts, document everything, and then render a professional judgment based on irrefutable proof. I drove to the house David and I shared in Pacific Heights. The Victorian we'd bought when the twins were 5. Sarah and Jessica were both in their senior year at Berkeley. Now, studying business and pre-law respectively. They came home most weekends, filling the house with laughter and arguments and the chaos I'd missed when they'd first left for college. How was I going to tell them their father was having an affair? How was I going to tell them their mother had been living a lie for the better part of a year? I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house. We'd renovated together, room by room, argument by argument, compromise by compromise. David had wanted to gut the whole place and start over. I'd insisted on preserving the original details, the crown, molding and hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. Some things are worth saving, I'd argued. Some things get better with age and care. Now I wondered if he'd been thinking about that conversation when he started sleeping with a woman 19 years younger than his wife. Inside, the house felt different. Not empty, it was always quiet when the girls were at school. And David was traveling. But there was a quality to the silence that felt final. Like the moment after a symphony ends and before the applause begins. A held breath. A pause before everything changes. I went to David's study, a room I rarely entered. It was his space, filled with his books on business and investment, his awards from the import company, his photographs from college and business trips. But today, I was looking for something specific. The safe was hidden behind a painting. A small Cézanne sketch that David had inherited from his grandmother. The irony of hiding secrets behind art wasn't lost on me. I'd known the combination for years. Our wedding date, but I'd never had reason to open it. Inside were the usual documents. Passport, birth certificate, social security card, insurance policies. But there was also a folder I'd never seen before. Marked, ML Imports, Partnership Agreement. ML. Martinelli. Sophia's last name. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside was a business partnership agreement dated 8 months ago. right when the LA trips had started. But it wasn't just a business arrangement. It was a complex financial structure that involved joint accounts, shared assets, and what appeared to be plans for expansion into international markets. And at the bottom of the last page, a handwritten note in David's unmistakable scrawl: Sophia, looking forward to building our future together. All our futures. Our futures. Plural. I photographed every page with my phone, returned the documents to the safe, and closed it carefully. Then I sat in David's leather chair and tried to process what I'd discovered. This wasn't just an affair. It was a complete reconstruction of his life, with me and the girls as what? The old model he was planning to trade in? The inconvenient first draft of a life he was rewriting with someone newer, shinier, more exciting? My phone rang. Sarah. Mom? Dad said he's in LA again. Are you okay? You sound weird, even from 100 miles away. My daughter could read my voice like I read brushstrokes on a canvas. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. You've been working too much. You need to take better care of yourself. Maybe when Dad gets back, you two should plan a vacation or something. You both seem so stressed lately. A vacation, with David, to celebrate 25 years of marriage and 8 months of adultery. That's a lovely idea, I said, because what else could I say? That her father was already taking plenty of vacations, with someone who could be her older sister? That the man she adored was a liar and a cheat and possibly planning to abandon his family for a new life with his business partner. Mom, are you sure you're okay? You really sound strange. Just missing you girls. The house feels too quiet without you. We'll be home Friday for Jessica's birthday dinner. You haven't forgotten, have you? I had. Completely. My younger daughter's 22nd birthday. And I'd forgotten because I was too busy discovering that my husband was living a double life. Of course not. I'll make reservations at Chez Laurent. The words were out before I could stop them. Chez Laurent. The restaurant where David had taken Sophia. Where they'd shared our anniversary dessert. Where I'd stood in my gallery window and watched my marriage dissolve over chocolate soufflé. Perfect. Dad will love that. You know how sentimental he gets about that place. Sentimental. Yes, I was beginning to understand exactly how David felt about Chez Laurent. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of David's study and realized I had 4 days. 4 days before my daughters came home, expecting to celebrate Jessica's birthday with both parents. 4 days before I'd have to smile and pretend and play the role of happy wife, while knowing that everything I'd believed about my life was as fake as the Monet sitting in my gallery. 4 days to decide whether I was going to expose the forgery or become complicit in it. But first, I had a business partnership to investigate. Because if David and Sophia thought they could build their future on the foundation of my destroyed marriage, they were about to learn something about authentication. I don't just spot fakes in paintings. I expose them. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and disappointment. Margaret Wu had been my attorney for 15 years, handling everything from gallery contracts to the twins' college trust funds. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and the kind of woman who could dissect a marriage settlement with surgical precision. Victoria, she said, standing as I entered her corner office, overlooking the bay. I have to say, when you called yesterday, asking about asset protection and prenuptial agreements, I was surprised. Most people don't think about these things after 25 years of marriage. Most people don't discover their husbands have been building a separate business empire with their mistresses, I replied, settling into the chair across from her massive desk. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw her switch into battle mode. Tell me everything. I laid out the evidence methodically. The LA trips, the partnership agreement, the social media posts, the Monet authentication that had brought Sophia into my gallery. Margaret took notes in her precise handwriting, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. This is complex, she said finally. The business partnership complicates everything. If David has been using marital assets to fund this venture with Ms. Martinelli, you may have grounds for claiming a portion of the business. But if they can prove it's entirely separate, what about a prenup? Margaret raised an eyebrow. After 25 years? That's unusual, but not impossible. However, any agreement signed now would require full disclosure of assets. And independent legal representation for both parties. You couldn't spring it on him. I'm not talking about signing one now, I said. I'm talking about one we may have signed 25 years ago. The silence stretched between us. Margaret set down her pen and studied my face. Victoria, do you have reason to believe you signed a prenuptial agreement that you don't remember? I thought about the conversation I'd had with my mother-in-law. 3 years ago, right before she died. Eleanor Chen had been a formidable woman. A first-generation immigrant who'd built a successful restaurant chain through sheer force of will. She'd never quite approved of me. Always made it clear she thought David had married beneath his potential. But in her final weeks, when the morphine made her reflective and unguarded, she'd said something strange. I'm glad David listened to me about protecting the family assets. Some women marry for money, you know. But you turned out all right, Victoria. You built your own success. At the time, I'd assumed she was rambling, mixing up her thoughts. But now, David's mother was very concerned about protecting family money. I said slowly. She made several comments over the years. About women who marry for financial security. And there's something else. David has always handled our important papers. Insurance, investments, legal documents. He said it was easier to keep everything organized in one place. And you trusted him to manage it all. He's my husband. The words sounded hollow even to me. Was my husband. Is my husband. I don't know what he is anymore. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Victoria, I need you to think carefully. Do you remember signing any legal documents around the time of your wedding? Anything beyond the marriage license? I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct those frantic weeks before our wedding. The dress fittings, the catering decisions, the family drama. The endless paperwork. David had handled most of the administrative details. Because I was finishing my dissertation and preparing for my comprehensive exams. There were so many documents, I said. Insurance paperwork when I was added to his policy. Bank signature cards for our joint accounts. I remember signing a lot of things in David's study one evening. Maybe a week before the wedding. His mother was there, and a man I thought was from the insurance company. Do you remember what you signed? No. David said it was all routine paperwork for married couples. Insurance beneficiaries, joint account agreements, investment authorizations. I trusted him. Margaret was taking notes again, her pen moving rapidly across the legal pad. If there is a prenup, and you signed it without independent legal representation, or full disclosure of assets, it might be challengeable. But we'd need to find it first. How would I do that? Start with your safe deposit box. Bank records. Check with the attorney who handled your house purchase sometimes. Lawyers keep copies of important documents. And, she paused, looking uncomfortable. You might need to search your house more thoroughly. If David has been hiding a prenup for 25 years, he's kept it somewhere you wouldn't normally look. I thought about David's study, the safe behind the Cézanne. I'd only looked for the partnership agreement. But there might be other folders, other secrets hidden behind art. There's something else, Margaret said. If your husband is planning to leave you for this business partner, he may be moving assets to protect them from a divorce settlement. The timing of this business partnership is suspicious. You should start documenting everything immediately. She handed me a folder. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, business records. Photograph everything. Keep copies in a separate location. And Victoria? She looked at me seriously. Don't let him know you're investigating. If he realizes you're onto him, he might accelerate whatever timeline he's working on. I drove home through San Francisco traffic, Margaret's words echoing in my mind. Don't let him know you're investigating. As if I were some kind of spy instead of a wife. Trying to understand why her marriage was disintegrating. But maybe that's exactly what I was now. A spy in my own life. Gathering intelligence about the man I'd shared a bed with for 25 years. The house was quiet when I arrived. David wasn't due back from LA until tomorrow, which gave me the entire afternoon to search. I started with his study, going through every file cabinet, every drawer, every box of old papers. I found tax returns dating back to our first year of marriage. Investment statements showing steady growth over 2 decades. Insurance policies, warranty information, user manuals for appliances. We'd long since replaced. The detritus of a shared life, carefully organized and filed. But no prenup. I moved to our bedroom, searching David's dresser, his side of the walk-in closet. The boxes of old photographs and memorabilia we kept on the upper shelves. Nothing. The basement was next, filled with holiday decorations. The twins' childhood toys, David's college textbooks, and boxes of papers from his early business ventures. I spent 2 hours going through everything, systematically, looking for anything that seemed out of place or unexpectedly important. And then, in a box labeled, College, Business School, buried beneath David's MBA thesis and old course syllabi, I found it. A manila envelope, yellowed with age. Labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize, Chen Lu Prenuptial Agreement, Original. Lu, my maiden name. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were multiple copies of a legal document, dated 3 weeks before our wedding. The language was dense, full of legal terminology. I had to read twice to understand. But the basics were clear enough. In the event of divorce, I would be entitled to no portion of David's family business interests, no claim on property acquired before marriage, and no spousal support beyond a modest monthly allowance. For a period not to exceed 2 years, I would keep whatever assets I brought to the marriage, and whatever I earned independently, but I would have no claim on the wealth David had inherited or might inherit in the future. And at the bottom of the last page, my signature. Victoria Liu, written in the careful script I'd used 25 years ago. Witnessed by Eleanor Chen and someone named Robert Martinelli, attorney at law. Martinelli. I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Sophia's surname. A coincidence? Or had this been planned even longer than I'd imagined? I photographed every page, then returned the envelope to its hiding place. On the drive back to Margaret's office, I called her secretary and made an emergency appointment. You found it, Margaret said, when I handed her the printed photos 2 hours later. My mother-in-law planned this. She convinced David to protect the family assets before we married, and she used an attorney named Robert Martinelli. That can't be a coincidence. Margaret was reading through the document, her expression growing darker with each page. Victoria, this is one of the most one-sided prenups I've ever seen. It's essentially a guarantee that you'd leave the marriage, with nothing more than you brought to it. But I didn't bring anything. I was a graduate student. I had about $3,000 in savings and a 10-year-old Honda. Exactly. This agreement was designed to ensure you could never benefit financially from your marriage to David, no matter how long it lasted or how much you contributed to building your life together. I thought about the gallery, the business I'd built from nothing, while David pursued his import ventures, the house we'd renovated together, using money from both our careers, the twins' college funds, fed by my income as much as his. 25 years of shared financial decisions, and according to this document, none of it belonged to me. Can it be challenged? Possibly. You were young, had no legal representation. And there's evidence David's family pressured you to sign. The fact that his mother was a witness is particularly problematic. It suggests undue influence. But Victoria, Margaret looked at me seriously. Fighting this will be expensive, public, and ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Sophia Martinelli, sitting in my gallery, asking me to authenticate her fake Monet, asking me to compromise my professional integrity for their business partnership, asking me to become complicit in my own deception. I've spent my career distinguishing authentic art from forgeries, I said. This prenup is like a painting that looks real until you examine it closely. It may have the right signatures and the proper documentation, but it was created under false pretenses. And forgeries, no matter how convincing, have no lasting value. Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Then let's expose it. But as I drove home, I realized the prenup was only part of the problem. Even if we could challenge it successfully, David and Sophia had 8 months head start on building their new life together. They had business partnerships, shared assets, and apparently the blessing of at least one member of the Chen family legal network. They thought they were so clever, planning my financial destruction while I played the role of the oblivious wife. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten what I do for a living, and I was about to give them a master class in authentication. The gallery felt different when I arrived Thursday morning. Emma was already at her desk, surrounded by coffee cups and paperwork. But she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Chen, we have a situation. My stomach dropped. What kind of situation? 3 different people called yesterday asking about the Monet authentication. 2 claimed to be representing the owner. And 1 said she was from an insurance company investigating potential fraud. None of them were Mr. Chen or Ms. Martinelli. I set down my purse slowly, processing this information. Did you give them any information? Of course not. But Mrs. Chen, I think you should know. One of the callers knew an awful lot about our authentication process. She knew about the pigment analysis, the canvas dating, even the specific equipment we use. This wasn't a casual inquiry. Someone was investigating the investigation. But who? And why? There's something else, Emma said, her voice dropping. I got here early this morning and found this slipped under the door. She handed me an envelope, expensive paper with my name, written in elegant script. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from Martinelli. Fine arts and a brief message. Mrs. Chen, I believe we should discuss the Monet situation privately. I have information that might interest you regarding your husband's business activities. Meet me at my gallery today at noon. Come alone. S. Martinelli. I read it twice, looking for hidden meaning in the formal language. Information about David's business activities. She was either offering to betray him or threatening to expose something I didn't even know about yet. Emma, I need you to handle the gallery this afternoon. And if anyone else calls about the Monet, refer them to our legal department. We don't have a legal department. As of today, we do. Martinelli Fine Arts occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian in Union Square. All exposed brick and dramatic lighting. It was smaller than my gallery, but undeniably elegant, the kind of space that whispered exclusivity and expensive taste. The artwork was impressive, a mix of contemporary pieces and what appeared to be authentic 19th-century European works. If these were real, Sophia had access to either extraordinary wealth or extremely good connections, or both. A young man in an expensive suit greeted me at the entrance. Mrs. Chen, Ms. Martinelli is waiting for you in the private viewing room. He led me through the main gallery to a back room, furnished with leather chairs and a small conference table. Sophia was standing before a large window overlooking a courtyard garden, her back to the door. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored black pants, her blonde hair falling in a perfect wave past her shoulders. When she turned, her smile was warm and professional, as if we were meeting for the first time. Victoria, thank you for coming. Please, sit. The use of my first name felt presumptuous, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. But I took the offered chair and waited for her to make the first move. I assume you're wondering why I asked you here. She began, settling gracefully into the chair across from me. The truth is, we have more in common than you might think. I doubt that. Her laugh was light, musical. Oh, but we do. We're both successful businesswomen in a male-dominated field. We both appreciate fine art, attention to detail, the importance of authenticity, and we both care about David's welfare. David's welfare, I repeated flatly. Yes. You see, Victoria, David has been struggling lately. The import business is more challenging than he anticipated, especially with the new regulations on European art imports. He's been under tremendous stress, making decisions that aren't always in his best interest. She was talking about my husband, as if he were a child who needed protection from his own poor judgment. What kind of decisions? Sophia reached for a folder on the table and withdrew several documents. Investment agreements, partnership modifications, asset transfers. I'm afraid David has been overly generous with business guarantees. If certain ventures don't work out as planned, his personal assets could be at risk. She slid the papers across the table. I recognized David's signature on each document, but the legal language was complex, full of clauses and subclauses that would require careful study to understand fully. Why are you showing me this? Because despite what you might think, I don't want to see David financially ruined, or his family hurt by his business mistakes. Sophia leaned forward, her expression earnest. There are ways to protect certain assets. Legal structures that could shield your house, your gallery, your daughter's college funds from any potential business losses. I studied her face, looking for tells the way. I looked for brushstroke patterns in suspect paintings. Her expression was perfectly composed, but there was something in her eyes that reminded me of a cat watching a mouse hole. And what would you want in return for this? Protection? Simply an acknowledgement that the Monet I submitted for authentication might deserve a second look. Perhaps a more favorable assessment. There it was. The real reason for this meeting. She wanted me to lie about the authentication in exchange for protecting my assets from David's business failures. Failures that might or might not be real, might or might not be David's fault, might or might not threaten everything I'd worked to build. The Monet is a fake, I said. A very good fake, but a fake nonetheless. I won't change my assessment. Sophia's smile didn't waver. I understand your position, but consider this: if David's business ventures fail, and if certain personal guarantees come due, your gallery could be vulnerable. Your house could be vulnerable. Your daughter's futures could be at risk. All for the sake of maintaining your professional integrity about one painting. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. Protect your family's financial security, or protect your reputation as someone who never makes mistakes about authentication. It seems like an obvious decision to me. I stood, leaving the documents on the table. I don't make deals with forgers. Sit down, Victoria. The honey was gone from her voice now, replaced by something harder. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. Your husband owes my family $2 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank back into the chair, staring at her. 2 million? My Uncle Robert, you remember him, he witnessed your prenup 25 years ago. He's been David's silent partner in several ventures over the years. The import business was supposed to generate enough profit to pay back those loans with interest. But the business is failing, Victoria. Badly. I thought about the partnership agreement I'd found in David's safe. The financial structures I hadn't fully understood. The business isn't failing. You're stealing from it. Sophia's laugh was sharp now, all pretense of friendliness gone. Stealing? No, Victoria. Managing. David never was very good with numbers. Was he? All those years you handled the household finances while he played at being an entrepreneur. But he got ambitious. Started making promises he couldn't keep, signing agreements he didn't understand. I felt the room spinning slightly. $2 million. How was that even possible? The prenup you signed so dutifully 25 years ago protects his inherited assets. But it doesn't protect him from business debts. If David defaults on his obligations to my family, we can claim everything he's acquired since your marriage. The house, his share of your gallery's profits, even the twins' college funds, if they're in his name. You're lying. Am I? Check your joint accounts, Victoria. Check the second mortgage David took out on your house 6 months ago. Check the loan he secured using your gallery as collateral. He's been very busy protecting his future with me, using your present as the foundation. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Even if this is true, David wouldn't risk our daughter's futures. He wouldn't gamble with our home. Your husband is a romantic, Victoria. He believes in grand gestures. Fresh starts, the possibility of reinventing himself at 53. He sees our business partnership as his chance to finally become the success his mother always wanted him to be. And if that means sacrificing the life he built with his first wife, well, that's what prenups are for. First wife. She was already thinking of me in the past tense. So here's what's going to happen. Sophia continued, her voice businesslike now. You're going to reconsider your authentication of the Monet. You're going to find that upon further examination, you were mistaken about certain technical details. The painting is authentic and worth approximately $4 million on the current market. I won't lie. Then you'll lose everything. Your house, your business, your daughter's educations. David will declare bankruptcy to avoid his business debts, and when the smoke clears, he'll start over with a clean slate and a new partner. One who appreciates his ambition rather than questioning his decisions. I stood again, this time moving toward the door. I need to verify what you've told me. Of course you do. You're thorough, methodical. It's one of your most admirable qualities. But Victoria? I turned back to look at her. You have 48 hours. The Monet authentication report is due Monday morning. If it doesn't say what I need it to say, David's loans will be called in immediately. And I think you'll find that your mortgage payments suddenly become much more difficult to manage. I walked out of the gallery. And somehow made it to my car before the tears started. 25 years of marriage, of building a life together, of trusting that we were partners in everything that mattered. And all along, David had been laying the groundwork for my destruction. But even through the shock and grief, my mind was working, analyzing, looking for the flaws in Sophia's story. She was too confident, too specific about things that should have been private between David and his creditors. And there was something else, something that didn't quite fit. The Monet wasn't worth $4 million. Even if it had been authentic. Which it wasn't, the market value would have been closer to $2 million. Why would Sophia inflate the number? Unless she needed a specific amount for a specific purpose? Unless the authentication wasn't about proving the painting's value. It was about creating a paper trail that justified moving a large sum of money. $4 million that would conveniently cover David's debt to the Martinelli family. With enough left over to fund their new business venture. I called Margaret Wu from the car. I need to see you immediately. And I need you to call a forensic accountant. Tonight. Victoria, what's happened? I think my husband and his business partner are trying to commit insurance fraud. And they want me to provide the documentation that makes it legal. The forensic accountant's name was Janet Rivera. And she had the kind of sharp, analytical mind that could dissect financial records. Like a coroner performing an autopsy. Margaret had called in a favor to get her to meet us at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, and by 11 o'clock. She'd spread 25 years of Chen family financial history across the conference table. Like evidence at a crime scene. Your instincts were right, Janet said, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. These patterns suggest systematic asset manipulation. Over the past 8 months, your husband has been moving money in ways that look legitimate on the surface, but serve to isolate you from any real financial security. I studied the papers, seeing my life reduced to numbers and transaction codes. Explain it to me like I'm not a forensic accountant. He's been using shell companies to transfer assets out of joint accounts and into business partnerships. You have no legal claim to. The house has been remortgaged twice. But the money didn't go into home improvements or joint investments. It went into ML Imports, the company he started with Sophia Martinelli. Margaret leaned forward. What about the college funds? Interesting situation there. The 529 plans were originally in both parents' names. But 6 months ago, David transferred ownership to himself alone. Legally, he can withdraw that money for any purpose. Though he'll pay penalties if it's not used for education. How much money are we talking about? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Janet consulted her notes. Combined with the house refinancing, the business loans, and the college fund transfers, David has gained access to approximately $1.8 million in what were originally marital assets. All of it is now tied up in ventures. That would be extremely difficult for you to claim in a divorce. 1.8 million. Close to the 2 million Sophia claimed David owed her family. Too close to be coincidental. But here's what's really interesting. Janet continued, pulling out another set of documents. ML Imports exists on paper. But there's very little evidence of actual import activity. No shipping records, no customs documentation, no inventory. It looks like a business designed to move money rather than goods. Money laundering? More like asset hiding, and possibly insurance fraud, if what you've told me about the Monet authentication is accurate. A fake painting authenticated as real, insured for an inflated value. Then, damaged, or stolen, in a way that triggers a large insurance payout. It's a classic scheme, but it requires an expert to provide the false authentication. An expert like me. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. This wasn't just a midlife crisis affair. It was a carefully orchestrated financial manipulation that had been in progress for months, possibly years. And I was supposed to be the final piece of the puzzle. The respected art authenticator who would provide the credibility their scheme needed to succeed. Can we stop it? I asked. Margaret and Janet exchanged a look. That depends, Margaret said. How badly do you want to fight? And how much collateral damage are you willing to accept? What do you mean? If we expose this scheme, David will be facing criminal charges. Fraud, money laundering, possibly tax evasion. The business assets will be frozen. Which means you might not recover the money he's hidden, at least not immediately. And your daughters will have to deal with the fact that their father is a criminal. I thought about Sarah and Jessica coming home tomorrow for Jessica's birthday dinner. They adored their father, still called him for advice about everything from career decisions to relationships. How do you tell your children that the man they idolize has been systematically stealing from their future? And if I don't fight it? You authenticate the fake Monet, they collect their insurance money. And you lose everything anyway. The difference is that David gets to look like the victim instead of the perpetrator. Poor businessman who got in over his head with the wrong partners. Lost everything through bad luck rather than bad choices. Janet cleared her throat. There is a third option. We could document everything we've discovered and approach the FBI's art fraud division. Let them build a case while you continue to play the unknowing wife. When they're ready to make arrests, you'd be protected as a witness rather than prosecuted as an accomplice. How long would that take? Months, maybe longer. And in the meantime, you'd have to maintain the facade that you don't know what your husband is doing. You'd have to continue living with him, sleeping next to him, pretending your marriage is intact while gathering evidence for his prosecution. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it. Months of lies, of acting like the devoted wife, while secretly building a case against my husband, of watching him make plans with Sophia, maybe even helping him pack for their trips to LA, all while knowing I was documenting every detail for federal investigators. What about the Monet authentication? I have to give them an answer by Monday. You authenticate it honestly, Margaret said. Declare it a fake, as you intended. Let them deal with the consequences. If they're planning insurance fraud, that report will derail their timeline. And if David really does owe the Martinellis $2 million, then he'll have to find another way to pay it back. Ways that don't involve destroying your financial security or compromising your professional integrity. I looked around the conference table at these two women who barely knew me, but had spent 3 hours trying to save my life from the wreckage my husband had created. Tomorrow night, I was supposed to sit across from David at Chez Laurent, celebrating our daughter's birthday, toasting her future while he systematically destroyed the foundation that future was built on. I need to ask you something, I said to Margaret. If I report this to the FBI, if I help them build a case against David, what happens to me? Professionally, I mean, will people assume I was complicit? Will they question every authentication I've ever done? Margaret considered the question carefully. There might be some initial suspicion, but your reputation in the art world is sterling. You've never been associated with any questionable authentications, and your work is respected internationally. If anything, your cooperation in exposing this fraud would probably enhance your credibility, and my gallery would likely see an increase in business. Nothing attracts clients like being associated with someone who has uncompromising integrity. I laughed, but it came out bitter. So destroying my marriage might actually be good for my career. Victoria, Janet said gently, your marriage was already destroyed. You just didn't know it yet. She was right, of course. The man I'd thought I was married to, devoted father, ambitious but honest businessman, partner in building our life together, that man didn't exist. Maybe he never had. Maybe I'd been authenticating a forgery for 25 years, and was only now sophisticated enough to spot the brushstrokes that didn't belong. I need to go home, I said, gathering the papers Janet had prepared for me. I need to think about this before the girls arrive tomorrow. Victoria, Margaret said as I reached the door. Whatever you decide, don't let him know you know. If David realizes you've discovered the scheme, he might accelerate his timeline. Assets could disappear overnight. I drove home through empty streets, the weight of the evening's revelations settling over me like fog rolling in from the bay. The house was dark when I arrived, exactly as I'd left it that morning. David wasn't due back from LA until tomorrow afternoon. Just in time for Jessica's birthday dinner. Just in time to sit across from his wife and daughters and play the role of devoted family man, while planning the destruction of everything they believed about their lives. I went to his study and opened the safe again, this time photographing everything inside. The prenup, the partnership agreements, bank account information, insurance policies. Evidence that would either save my future or destroy the last remnants of my faith in the man I'd loved for half my adult life. But as I was closing the safe, something caught my attention. A small key taped to the inside back panel. Barely visible unless you were looking for it. I peeled it off carefully and examined it in the desk lamp's light. It was too small for a safe deposit box, too old for a modern lock. It looked like the kind of key that might open a filing cabinet or a desk drawer. Something from an earlier era when locks were simpler. And secrets were easier to hide. I searched David's study, systematically, looking for anything that might need a key this size. Nothing. But then I remembered the basement storage room. Filled with boxes from David's college years and early career. Boxes I'd never had reason to examine closely. 20 minutes later, in a cardboard box. Labeled, First Apartment, I found what the key unlocked. A small metal cash box, the kind ambitious young men might use to store important documents in the days before computerized banking and digital records. Inside were letters, dozens of them, spanning several years. All addressed to David at his first business address. The return address was always the same: R. Martinelli, attorney at law, San Francisco, California. I opened the oldest letter first, dated 6 months before David and I met. The handwriting was precise, formal, the tone that of a mentor addressing a protege. David, I've reviewed the business plan for your import venture. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I must reiterate my concerns about your lack of capital and experience. However, my brother Antonio has expressed interest in providing financing. With certain conditions. I read through the correspondence. Chronologically, watching the relationship evolve from professional consultation to something more complex. Robert Martinelli wasn't just David's lawyer. He was his benefactor, his business advisor, and eventually, his partner in ventures that seemed to exist primarily on paper. And in the final letter, dated just 2 months before our wedding, the truth emerged. David, I'm pleased that you've taken my advice about protecting inherited assets through prenuptial agreement. My niece Sophia has shown considerable aptitude for the art import business. And I believe she would be an ideal partner for your future ventures. When the time is right, I will arrange an introduction. For now, focus on establishing yourself in the marriage and building the foundation we've discussed. The long-term strategy remains unchanged. The long-term strategy. They'd been planning this for 25 years. My entire marriage had been part of a business plan designed to position David for a future partnership with Sophia Martinelli. I wasn't the love of his life who he'd gradually grown apart from. I was the opening move in a game I'd never even known was being played. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by the evidence of my own careful deception, and realized that everything I'd believed about my life was as fake as the Monet sitting in my gallery. But unlike the painting, I could still rewrite the ending. Jessica's birthday dinner was a masterpiece of family theater. We sat at our usual table at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where I'd watched David feed chocolate soufflé to his mistress just 2 weeks earlier. The irony was so perfect it was almost artistic. David had returned from LA that afternoon, with gifts for Jessica and stories about successful business meetings that I now knew were lies. He was charming, attentive, the perfect family man celebrating his daughter's 22nd birthday. He'd even remembered to bring flowers for me, as if 3 days of adultery required floral compensation. Dad, tell Mom about the art collector you met in LA. Jessica said, cutting into her duck confit. The one with the Picasso. I watched David's face carefully as he launched into a story about a fictitious collector with a questionable Picasso who needed authentication services. He was improvising, building the lie in real time, but he was good at it. 25 years of marriage had taught him exactly how to sound enthusiastic about art, without revealing that he knew nothing about it. He specifically asked about Bay Area authenticators. David continued, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I told him he couldn't do better than my wife. You're internationally respected, Maggie. This could be a huge opportunity. Maggie. He was the only person who still called me that, a nickname from our early dating days. That had survived everything else about our relationship. Now it sounded like an accusation, a reminder of the woman I'd been before I learned to see through his deceptions. What kind of Picasso? I asked, playing my role in the charade. Blue period. A portrait of a woman. The collector thinks it might be one of the lost works from 1903. I nodded and smiled, even though I knew there were no lost Picasso portraits from 1903. Currently being offered for authentication in Los Angeles. If such a painting existed, it would be international news in the art world. But Sarah and Jessica were hanging on every word, excited by the possibility that their mother might authenticate a major discovery. "That's amazing, Mom," Sarah said. "Can you imagine finding a lost Picasso? You'd be famous. Your mother is already famous in her field," David said, raising his wine glass. "To the most talented authenticator on the West Coast, and the most beautiful wife a man could ask for." We all raised our glasses. I sipped the Cabernet and wondered if this was how other people felt when they knowingly drank poison, aware of what they were consuming, but unable to stop the ritual of destruction. "Dad," Jessica said suddenly, "you seem different lately. Happier. More energetic. It's nice to see." David's smile was radiant. "I am happier, sweetheart. The business is finally taking off the way I always dreamed it would. Your old dad might finally make something of himself." "You've already made something of yourself," Sarah protested. "You built a successful import company. You have a beautiful family. What more could you want?" What more could he want? I thought about Sophia Martinelli, 19 years younger, sophisticated, ambitious. I thought about the $2 million David owed her family. The business partnership that was really a financial manipulation scheme. The future he was building on the foundation of my destroyed present. "Sometimes," David said, his voice taking on the philosophical tone he used when he'd had just enough wine to become reflective, "a man reaches a point where he has to choose between the life he's lived and the life he still dreams of living. Between security and possibility. Between what's safe and what's extraordinary." The girls were nodding, caught up in his vision of reinvention and second chances. But I heard the subtext clearly. He was preparing them for his departure. Laying the groundwork for the story he'd tell when our marriage ended. He wouldn't be the villain who abandoned his family for a younger woman. He'd be the dreamer who finally found the courage to pursue his authentic life. "That's beautiful, Dad," Jessica said. "I hope I'm brave enough to chase my dreams the way you have." "You will be, sweetheart. Both of you will. You got your mother's strength and your father's ambition. You'll build extraordinary lives." I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from the performance. In the mirror, I looked like what I was. A woman playing a role she no longer believed in. My makeup was perfect, my black dress elegant, my jewelry appropriate for a family celebration. But my eyes gave me away. They held the flat, distant expression of someone watching her life from the outside. When I returned to the table, David was showing the girls photos on his phone. "Business meetings," he claimed. But I could see enough to recognize the backgrounds. Hotel lobbies, restaurant terraces, wine bars. All the places a man might take his mistress during a 3-day romantic getaway. Disguised as a business trip. "The art import business is fascinating," he was saying. "So much more complex than I initially realized. My partner has been incredibly helpful in navigating the European connections." Partner. Not business associate, not colleague. Partner. The word choice was deliberate. Another piece of foundation work for the story he'd eventually tell. After dinner, we walked back to the house together, David's arm around my waist. The girls chattering about their classes and social lives and post-graduation plans. To anyone watching, we looked like the perfect family. Successful parents, accomplished daughters, the kind of people who belonged in Pacific Heights. With their renovated Victorian and their carefully curated life. But I kept thinking about the cash box in the basement, filled with 25 years of correspondence. That proved our entire marriage had been a business arrangement. David hadn't fallen out of love with me. He'd never been in love with me at all. I'd been a placeholder, a practice round, a warm-up act for the main event of his life with Sophia Martinelli. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah asked as we reached the front door. "You've been quiet all evening." "Just tired, sweetheart. It's been a long week at the gallery. You should take a vacation," Jessica suggested. "Maybe you and Dad could go somewhere romantic. Paris, maybe. You always said you wanted to see the Louvre's authentication labs." "That's a wonderful idea," David said, his arm tightening around my waist. "We should definitely plan a trip. Maybe this spring, when the import season slows down." Spring. By spring, according to the timeline, I was beginning to understand, David would be long gone. The authentication report for the fake Monet was due Monday morning. Whatever scheme he and Sophia were running would be complete within weeks. He was agreeing to a vacation. He had no intention of taking with a wife he was planning to abandon. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, David and I lay in our king-size bed in the master bedroom we'd shared for 15 years. He reached for me in the darkness, his hands familiar after 25 years of marriage. And I let him make love to me while I stared at the ceiling. And wondered if this was how spies felt when they had to maintain their cover. Even in the most intimate moments. Afterward, he fell asleep immediately, his breathing deep and regular. But I lay awake, listening to the sound of his contentment. And realized that I'd made my decision. Monday morning, I would submit my authentication report. The Monet was a fake, and I would document every detail of its forgery. With the precision and thoroughness that had built my reputation. But I wouldn't stop there. I would also include a detailed appendix, documenting the suspicious circumstances surrounding the authentication request, the financial irregularities I'd discovered in my husband's business dealings, and the evidence suggesting that the painting was part of a larger fraud scheme. I would send copies to the insurance company that would be asked to pay out on the painting's inflated value. I would send copies to the FBI's Art Fraud Division. I would send copies to the California State Bar, since Robert Martinelli's law practice appeared to be facilitating financial crimes. And I would send a copy to David, with a cover letter explaining exactly how thoroughly I'd authenticated not just the painting, but our entire marriage. He thought he was so clever, using my expertise to validate his deceptions. But he'd forgotten the most important rule of art authentication. If you want to create a convincing forgery, you have to understand the original better than anyone else in the world. And I understood David Chen better than he understood himself. He'd spent 25 years underestimating the woman sleeping next to him. Assuming that love made me blind, that devotion made me stupid. That a wife would always choose willful ignorance over painful truth. But I wasn't just a wife. I was an expert at spotting fakes. And on Monday morning, I was going to expose the biggest forgery of my life. The FBI office in downtown San Francisco was nothing like what I'd expected. No dramatic lighting or intimidating interrogation rooms. Just fluorescent bulbs and government-issued furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Special Agent Maria Santos was younger than I'd anticipated. Maybe 40, with serious brown eyes and a handshake that conveyed both competence and sympathy. Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming in. I've reviewed the materials you sent, and I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen in 15 years. With the Art Fraud Division, she'd spread my evidence across a conference table like pieces of a puzzle. The fake Monet authentication report, the financial records Janet Rivera had analyzed, the correspondence from Robert Martinelli, the partnership agreements, even photographs of the prenup I'd found hidden in our basement. How long have you suspected your husband was involved in fraudulent activity? Agent Santos asked. I didn't. Not until 2 weeks ago, when Sophia Martinelli came to my gallery, asking me to change my authentication of the Monet. Even then, I thought it was just about the painting. I had no idea about the financial manipulation, the long-term planning, the extent of the deception. But you continued to investigate on your own. Rather than confronting your husband directly, I thought about how to explain it. In my profession, you learn to gather all the evidence. Before making a judgment, you don't declare a painting authentic or fake based on initial impressions. You analyze every detail, compare it to known examples, research the provenance. I approached my marriage the same way. Agent Santos nodded. And what you discovered was that the entire relationship was constructed to serve someone else's financial interests. The Martinelli family has been positioning David for 25 years. The prenup, the business partnerships, even our marriage itself. It was all designed to create a situation where David could access significant assets without legal consequences. When he divorces me, the prenup protects his inherited wealth. And all the marital assets he's moved into business partnerships will be beyond my reach. But they needed your cooperation to make the final piece work. The Monet authentication. A fake painting authenticated as genuine, insured for an inflated value. Then presumably stolen or damaged. In a way that triggers a $4 million insurance payout. That money would cover David's debts to the Martinellis. And fund their new business ventures. Agent Santos pulled out a file I hadn't seen before. We've been investigating Robert Martinelli's law practice for 2 years. He specializes in creating complex financial structures that allow his clients to hide assets or manipulate business partnerships. Your husband isn't his first victim. But he might be his most ambitious project. Victim? Mrs. Chen, I don't think your husband fully understands what he's gotten involved in. The Martinelli family has connections to organized crime in both Italy and California. They've been using art fraud as a way to launder money for decades. Your husband may have started as a willing participant. But at this point, he's probably in too deep to back out safely. I stared at the photographs of the fake Monet, trying to process this new information. Are you saying David is in physical danger? I'm saying that people who owe $2 million to the wrong kind of family don't usually get to walk away from their obligations. Your husband has been useful to them because of his access to your expertise and your gallery's reputation. But if he can't deliver what he's promised. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I thought about David's behavior over the past few months. The late-night phone calls he took in his study. The stress he tried to hide behind his charm and optimism. Maybe he wasn't just planning to abandon his family. Maybe he was trying to save us from the consequences of his mistakes. What happens now? I asked. We've been building a case against the Martinellis for months. But we needed evidence of their current activities. Your documentation gives us everything we need to move forward. We'll coordinate with the insurance company to prepare for the fraud attempt. And we'll monitor the Monet situation to see how they proceed. And David? That depends on how cooperative he's willing to be. If he helps us build a case against the Martinellis, we might be able to work out a plea arrangement. If he continues to participate in their schemes, she shrugged, he'll be prosecuted along with them. I drove home in a daze, trying to understand how my life had become a federal case. 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern was a slow season at the gallery. Now I was a witness in an organized crime investigation. My husband was potentially facing prison time. And my marriage was evidence in a fraud scheme that spanned decades. The house was empty when I arrived. David was at the office, probably meeting with Sophia to discuss my authentication report, which I'd submitted that morning declaring the Monet an unquestionably fake. By now, they knew their insurance fraud plan had collapsed. The question was what they'd do next. I was in the kitchen making tea when my phone rang. David, Maggie, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the gallery? His voice was strained, different from the confident charm he'd displayed at Jessica's birthday dinner. Is everything okay? Just, please, meet me at the gallery in an hour. And Maggie? Don't bring anyone else. The gallery felt different when I arrived, charged with tension like the air before a thunderstorm. David was standing in front of the fake Monet, still mounted on its easel, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked older than he had that morning, his shoulders curved inward. His usual confidence replaced by something that looked like resignation. You know, he said without turning around. 25 years ago, when I first walked into your graduate student office and saw you bent over that research paper, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Smart, passionate, completely absorbed in something I didn't understand, but wanted to be part of. I said nothing, waiting. I told myself I fell in love with you that day. And maybe I did, in my own way. But the truth is, I fell in love with the idea of you. The brilliant art historian who could authenticate masterpieces, who could give credibility to anything she touched. I needed someone like you, and you were perfect. Perfect for what? He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. For the plan, the long-term strategy Robert Martinelli designed for me when I was 28 and desperate to prove myself to my mother. Build a life with a respected art expert, gain access to authentication networks. Create legitimate business connections that could be used for less legitimate purposes. And Sophia was always part of the plan. From the beginning, I was supposed to marry you, establish myself, build a family that looked successful and stable. Then, when the time was right, transition to a partnership with Sophia. That would allow the Martinellis to expand their operations into high-end art fraud. I sank into one of the gallery chairs, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. 25 years. The twins, the house, our entire life together. Was real, Maggie. Whatever else you believe, know that it was real. I loved you, I loved our daughters, I loved the life we built. But I also owed money to people who don't forgive debts. And I made promises I couldn't break without destroying everything we'd created. So you decided to destroy it yourself instead. David laughed bitterly. I thought I could manage it. Keep everyone happy, find a way to satisfy the Martinellis. Without losing my family. But the business failed, the debts piled up. And suddenly the only way out was through you. Through your reputation, your expertise. Your willingness to authenticate one painting that would solve all my problems. A fake painting. A fake painting that you were supposed to declare authentic. That would have been enough, Maggie. $4 million to cover my debts. And fund a new business venture that would have kept everyone safe. Including you and the girls. I stared at him, this man I'd shared my life with, trying to understand how he'd convinced himself. That fraud was a form of protection. And after the insurance payout? What then? Divorce. Clean, amicable, with the prenup protecting both our interests. You'd keep the gallery, I'd start over with Sophia. The girls would have 2 stable homes instead of one built on lies and debts. 2 stable homes built on fraud. 1 stable home for you, built on your own success. And 1 for me, built on whatever I could manage. I understood now why Agent Santos had called David a victim. He'd spent so many years following someone else's plan that he'd lost the ability to distinguish between protection and destruction, between love and manipulation. The Martinellis had convinced him that betraying his family was the only way to save them. David, I said gently, the FBI knows everything. About the Martinellis, about the money laundering, about the fake painting. They have copies of all the financial records, all the correspondence, all the evidence. It's over. His face went white. You reported us? I reported the fraud. You can still choose which side of this you want to be on. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The fake Monet between us like a monument to everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. Then David pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Agent Santos? This is David Chen. I understand my wife has been talking to you about the Martinelli situation. I'd like to arrange a meeting. I have information you might find useful. He hung up and looked at me. With something that might have been gratitude or relief or simple exhaustion. I'm sorry, Maggie, for all of it. For the lies, for the betrayal, for turning you into evidence. In someone else's crime. You deserved better than a husband who loved you enough to marry you. But not enough to be honest with you. I deserved the truth, I said. But more than that, I deserved the chance to choose what kind of life I wanted to build with that truth. David nodded. Will you forgive me? Eventually? I thought about the question, looking around the gallery. I'd built through my own expertise and hard work. The space that had always been mine even when everything else was contaminated by his deceptions. I'll forgive the man I thought I married, I said finally. But I'm not sure he ever really existed. 6 months later, I stood in my gallery's main exhibition space. Watching as visitors admired the new show, Authentic vs. Replica: The Science of Art Authentication. It was drawing record crowds, partly because of the publicity surrounding the Martinelli case. But mostly because people were genuinely fascinated by the process of distinguishing truth from deception. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the fake Monet that had started it all, displayed next to detailed documentation of exactly how I'd identified its fraudulent elements. Visitors could see the microscopic analysis of the paint samples, the chemical testing results that revealed modern pigments, the comparative photographs showing how the brushstroke patterns differed from authenticated Monet works. It was, ironically, the most educational display I'd ever created. Truth through transparency. Mrs. Chen? A young woman approached, holding a notebook and wearing the eager expression of a journalism student. I'm writing my senior thesis on art fraud. Could I ask you a few questions about the authentication process? Of course. But call me Victoria, please. I'd reclaimed my full name after the divorce was finalized. Not Victoria Clark, not Victoria Liu, just Victoria. Clean, simple, belonging entirely to me. What was the most challenging part of identifying the fake? The student asked, pen poised over her notebook. I considered the question, looking past her to where the Monet hung under gallery lighting. The technical analysis was straightforward once I knew what to look for. But the most challenging part was accepting that someone I trusted had asked me to authenticate a lie. When deception comes from people close to you, it's much harder to see clearly. She scribbled notes furiously. Do you think your personal connection to the case affected your professional judgment? Actually, it sharpened it. When someone tries to use your expertise to commit fraud, you become extremely motivated to be thorough. This authentication was probably the most detailed analysis I've ever conducted. Emma appeared at my elbow, holding a tablet. Victoria, the Times reporter is here for the 3 o'clock interview. And the Smithsonian curator called. They want to discuss bringing the exhibition to Washington next year. The Smithsonian. 6 months ago, I'd been the unknowing wife of a con artist. Now museums were competing to display my work. Success, it turned out, had an ironic sense of timing. Give me 5 minutes, I told Emma, then turned back to the student. Was there anything else? Just one more question. Do you ever feel guilty about exposing your husband's crimes? I mean, you destroyed his life to save your own. I'd been asked variations of this question dozens of times over the past 6 months. By reporters, by colleagues, by my own daughters. When they'd finally processed what their father had done, the assumption was always the same, that my choice to report the fraud was somehow vindictive. That I'd chosen revenge over loyalty. I didn't destroy David's life, I said carefully. I exposed the lies he'd built his life on. There's a difference. David had 25 years to choose honesty over deception. He chose deception every single time. I simply refused to be complicit in it any longer. The student nodded and closed her notebook. After she left, I walked through the gallery, checking on the other exhibits. Greeting visitors, performing the daily rituals of running a successful business. But my mind was elsewhere, thinking about the call I'd received that morning. David was getting out of federal prison next month. His cooperation with the FBI had earned him a reduced sentence. 18 months instead of the 5 to 7 years he could have faced. He'd testified against Robert Martinelli and provided detailed documentation of the family's money laundering operations. The elder Martinelli had been sentenced to 12 years. Sophia had fled to Italy before her indictment was unsealed, and was fighting extradition. According to his lawyer, David wanted to see me when he was released. To apologize properly, to try to explain the choices he'd made, to ask for some kind of forgiveness. That might let him rebuild a relationship with our daughters. Sarah and Jessica had visited him twice in prison. Duty visits that left them drained and confused. They loved their father, but they couldn't reconcile the charming man who'd raised them with the convicted felon, who'd nearly destroyed their family's financial security. Both girls were in therapy, trying to process the revelation that their entire childhood had been built on their father's elaborate deception. Victoria? Emma was back, looking uncertain. There's someone here to see you. She says she's your former sister-in-law? I looked up, surprised. David's sister Michelle lived in Portland and rarely visited San Francisco. We'd maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce. But she'd made it clear that she blamed me for David's downfall. In her mind, I should have found a way to handle the situation privately, without involving law enforcement. But the woman standing in the gallery entrance wasn't Michelle. She was taller, blonde, wearing an expensive coat that looked European in cut and style. It took me a moment to recognize her. Without the confident smile and predatory energy that had characterized our previous meetings. Sophia Martinelli looked older, thinner, her face drawn in a way that suggested months of stress and sleepless nights. She approached slowly, her hands clasped in front of her, like someone approaching an altar. Victoria, thank you for agreeing to see me. I didn't agree to see you. You just showed up. I know, I'm sorry, but I needed to talk to you before. She gestured vaguely, as if the rest of the sentence was too complicated to complete. I glanced around the gallery. There were visitors within earshot. And Emma was watching from the reception desk with obvious concern. We can talk in my office. 5 minutes. My office was a small space behind the main gallery, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with authentication certificates and photographs from exhibitions. Sophia sat carefully, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like armor. I wanted to apologize, she began, then stopped. No, that's not accurate. I wanted to explain, to help you understand what really happened. I understand perfectly. You and your family spent 25 years positioning my husband for a long-term fraud scheme. You used his desperation and his mother's ambitions to turn him into a weapon against me. You nearly destroyed my family, my business, and my professional reputation. What else is there to understand? Sophia flinched but didn't look away. You're right about all of that. But you don't understand David's situation. The debt wasn't just about money. My uncle, my family, they don't just take your assets when you can't pay. They take everything. Your safety, your family's safety, your future. David was trying to protect you and the girls the only way he knew how. By betraying us. By keeping you out of it. The original plan was much simpler: authenticate the money as genuine. We collect the insurance money, David's debt is cleared. And everyone moves on with their lives. You would never have known about any of it. I stared at her, amazed by the twisted logic. And you thought that was morally acceptable? Building your financial future on insurance fraud and my professional lies? I thought it was survival. My family has been involved in complicated business arrangements for 3 generations. I grew up believing that lines between legal and illegal were arbitrary. That success meant finding ways around inconvenient rules. It wasn't until I saw what we'd done to David, to you, to your daughters, that I realized. She paused, struggling with words. That some lines exist for good reasons. Is that why you're here? To confess your moral awakening? I'm here because I'm dying. The words hit like a physical blow. I studied Sophia's face more carefully, noting the weight loss. The pallor beneath expertly applied makeup, the way she held herself as if movement caused pain. Cancer, she continued. Pancreatic. The doctors in Milan give me maybe 6 months. I came back to the US to try to make some things right before I can't anymore. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a savage satisfaction, justice served by biology rather than the legal system. But another part recognized the universal tragedy of mortality, the way death strips away everything except the need for some kind of redemption. What do you want from me, Sophia? Nothing for myself. But David, when he gets out of prison next month, he's going to need help rebuilding his life. Not financially, I know you can't trust him with money, and you shouldn't. But emotionally, he's carrying guilt that's destroying him from the inside. He should carry guilt. He earned it, yes, but not the guilt he's carrying. He thinks he destroyed your life, Victoria. He doesn't understand that you're stronger now, more successful, more respected than you've ever been. He sees himself as the man who ruined the perfect wife and mother. Not as the man who freed a brilliant authenticator from a marriage built on lies. I walked to the window, looking out at the busy San Francisco street. People hurried past, carrying their own secrets, their own deceptions, their own complicated relationships with truth and lies. Why does it matter to you how David feels? Because I loved him, not the way I was supposed to. Not as part of the family business plan, but genuinely. And love, real love, wants the beloved to find peace. Even when you can't share it with them. I turned back to face her. What exactly are you asking me to do? See him when he's released. Let him apologize properly. Help him understand that he didn't destroy you, that maybe, in some strange way, he freed you to become who you were always meant to be. And you think that will give him peace? I think it might give him a chance. And Victoria? Sophia stood, moving carefully, her illness evident in every gesture. I think it might give you closure too. The kind you can't get from federal prosecutions or divorce settlements. Or even successful exhibitions. The kind that comes from looking at someone who hurt you and choosing forgiveness. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be free of carrying their guilt along with your own pain. After she left, I sat alone in my office for a long time. Thinking about forgiveness and justice, about the difference between punishing someone and freeing yourself from the need to punish them. The gallery hummed with activity beyond my door. Visitors, staff, the daily business of authenticating truth in a world full of beautiful lies. 3 weeks later, I received a call from David. He was staying at a halfway house in Oakland. working at a nonprofit that helped ex-convicts find employment, trying to rebuild his life. One careful step at a time. His voice was different, quieter. More careful, stripped of the confident charm that had once defined him. Maggie, I know I don't have the right to ask, but could we meet? Just to talk. I have things I need to say, and I hope, you might have things you need to hear. We met at a coffee shop in Berkeley. Neutral territory neither of us had any history with. David looked older, grayer, his expensive suits replaced by thrift store clothes and a humility I'd never seen before. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. As if prison had burned away everything false and left only the essential man underneath. I brought you something, he said, reaching into a worn backpack. He withdrew a small wrapped package and set it on the table between us. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a book, a collection of art authentication case studies, published by the Smithsonian. On the dedication page, someone had written, "To Victoria Clark, whose integrity and expertise have advanced the field of art authentication immeasurably. Thank you for showing us that truth is always worth protecting, no matter the personal cost." The FBI agent who worked our case, David explained. She said she'd never seen documentation as thorough as yours. She said you'd probably saved other people from falling for similar schemes. That your work would be studied in art fraud courses for years. I touched the inscription, thinking about the long path from that first meeting with Sophia in my gallery to this moment, sitting across from my ex-husband in a Berkeley coffee shop, holding evidence that my worst betrayal had somehow become my greatest professional achievement. David, I said finally, I need you to understand something. I don't forgive you because you've suffered enough. Or because you're sorry or because Sophia asked me to. I forgive you because I choose to be free of this. Free of anger, free of the need to punish you. Free of defining myself by what you did to me instead of what I did in response to it. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Maggie. For all of it. For the lies, for the betrayal, for turning our marriage into evidence. In a criminal case, you deserved so much better. I deserved the truth. But more than that, I deserved the chance to choose my own response to that truth. And I did. I chose to be the kind of person who exposes lies rather than enabling them. I chose to build a life based on my own integrity, rather than someone else's deceptions. I chose to be authentic, even when authenticity was painful. We talked for 2 hours, filling in the gaps in each other's stories, understanding finally how we'd arrived at such different places from the same starting point. When we parted, it wasn't with promises of reconciliation or renewed friendship. It was with the quiet acknowledgement that we'd both survived the wreckage of our shared lies and emerged as different people, flawed, wounded, but ultimately honest. I drove back to San Francisco as the sun set over the bay, thinking about the exhibition that had made my career, the marriage that had taught me the value of truth, and the future I was building, one careful authentication at a time. In the distance, the city lights began to twinkle like stars, each one representing someone's story, someone's struggle to distinguish between what was real and what was merely convincing. And for the first time in 25 years, I knew exactly where I belonged in that constellation of truth and deception. I belonged to myself, authentic and uncompromising. A woman who had learned that the most important thing you can authenticate is your own life. The gallery was dark when I arrived, but I let myself in anyway. Walking through the familiar space, to stand once more before the fake Monet that had changed everything. In the dim security lighting, it looked almost genuine, beautiful enough to fool anyone who didn't look too closely. But I had looked closely. I had seen through the deception, documented the fraud, exposed the truth. And in doing so, I had discovered something more valuable than any authentic masterpiece, the knowledge that no one else could ever again convince me to call a lie the truth. That, I realized, was the real art of calculated revenge. Not destroying the person who hurt you, but refusing to be destroyed by them. Not seeking justice from external sources, but creating it through your own choices, your own integrity, your own commitment to authentic living. I locked the gallery and walked into the San Francisco night, carrying nothing but my own hard-won truth. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough.